It was one of those evenings when everything inside the Grand Hotel seemed to sparkle. The chandeliers shone brightly, the polished floors reflected the soft golden light, and guests dressed in elegant clothes moved gracefully between tables. The air was filled with the sound of quiet laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle hum of the piano that stood near the center of the lounge. It wasn't just any night. A famous pianist was performing for a private audience, and everyone there felt lucky to witness it. The pianist sat at the grand piano with an easy confidence that only years of experience could bring. Every movement of his hands seemed effortless. His fingers danced lightly across the keys, turning even the simplest tune into something magical. Guests watched with admiration, whispering about his talent, his fame, and his charm. Some of them had traveled miles just to hear him play in person. He was known not only for his incredible skill but also for his lively personality. He loved to entertain, and tonight, he was in a particularly playful mood. Not far from the piano, moving quietly between the tables, was a woman wearing the hotel's uniform, a white shirt, a black vest, and a small name tag pinned to her chest. She wasn't part of the glamorous crowd. She worked there as a server, making sure everyone had what they needed. She carried trays with careful hands, balancing drinks and plates, her steps soft and precise. Though she was surrounded by laughter and music, she kept to herself, speaking only when needed. Most of the guests barely noticed her. To them, she was just another face in the background. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen something in her eyes, a quiet depth, a kind of distant sadness mixed with strength. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her hands, though steady, had a faint tremor every now and then when they passed over the piano keys while cleaning the tables nearby. It was subtle, but it told a story. The pianist ended his song with a dramatic flourish. The final note hung in the air, clear and sharp, before fading into silence. Then came the applause. The guests clapped and cheered, and the pianist stood up, giving a playful bow. He was enjoying himself. After several pieces, he turned to the crowd with a mischievous grin and said, "Well, that's enough of me for now. Maybe someone else would like to give it a try." The audience laughed. Everyone knew he was joking. Most people there wouldn't dare touch the piano, not with him in the room. But the pianist wasn't done teasing. He scanned the room slowly, pretending to look for a volunteer. Then his gaze landed on the quiet woman standing by the bar, holding an empty tray. "You?" he said with a playful tone, pointing at her. "Yes, you! You've been watching closely all evening. Do you want to play something for us?" The room erupted in laughter. People looked at the woman with amused smiles, expecting her to blush and shake her head. She froze, unsure how to respond. For a moment, she thought he must be joking. She looked down, embarrassed, then glanced toward her manager, who stood near the entrance. He gave her a small nod, silently telling her it was all right to go along with it. The pianist, still smiling, pulled the bench back a little. "Come on," he said, still joking. "Just a few notes. Don't worry, I promise not to judge." The woman's heart raced. Every eye in the room was on her. Her fingers tightened around the tray before she carefully placed it on a nearby table. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. The guests watched with amused curiosity. No one really expected anything remarkable. It was just a moment of harmless fun, they thought. When she reached the piano, the pianist stepped aside with a dramatic gesture, pretending to hand over his kingdom. "It's all yours," he said with a grin. She smiled nervously, unsure what to say. Her hands hovered above the keys but didn't touch them yet. For a few seconds, she just stared at the piano. It was beautiful. Polished wood, ivory keys gleaming under the light. She hadn't been this close to one in years. Memories flickered in her mind. Old practice rooms, small competitions, and long afternoons spent playing just for the love of it. But that was another lifetime ago. The pianist leaned against the piano, folding his arms. "Take your time," he said, half teasing, half curious now. The audience chuckled softly. She finally sat down on the bench. Her fingers rested gently on the keys, and she took a deep breath. The feel of the piano under her fingertips brought back a rush of emotions. It was like reuniting with an old friend, one she had missed deeply but never thought she'd see again. At first, she pressed a few keys lightly, just to test the sound. The soft notes floated into the air. Then she paused again. The pianist tilted his head, studying her. Something in her calm focus made him straighten a little. The guests whispered among themselves, wondering what she was doing. Some expected her to play a simple tune, maybe something clumsy and awkward that would make everyone laugh. But then, without warning, she began to play. The first notes were quiet and smooth, almost like a whisper. The sound was gentle but steady. Then slowly her hands started to move faster. The melody began to form, clear, graceful, full of emotion. The pianist's smile faded, replaced by surprise. The guests stopped talking. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of her playing. It was a tune none of them recognized at first. It wasn't flashy or loud, but it had something special. Soul. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her story. Her fingers moved across the keys with natural ease, as if she had never stopped playing. It was the kind of performance that didn't just impress people's ears. It touched their hearts. The pianist moved closer, watching her hands. His playful attitude was gone now. What he saw in front of him wasn't a nervous worker pretending to play. It was a musician who had spent years with the piano, someone who understood its language. He realized that she wasn't just repeating memorized notes. She was feeling every one of them. The melody grew deeper, building into a soft wave of emotion. Some guests leaned forward, unable to look away. A few even forgot to breathe for a moment. No one expected this. The same woman who had been quietly serving drinks minutes ago was now filling the room with music so powerful that it felt like time had stopped. The pianist looked around the room. Every face told the same story, disbelief mixed with awe. The laughter from earlier was gone. All that remained was silence and admiration. When the last note finally faded, the woman lifted her hands slowly from the keys. The room remained quiet for a few seconds, as if everyone was afraid that clapping might break the spell. Then suddenly the sound of applause burst out. People stood up, clapping and cheering. The pianist joined them, his expression one of pure respect. The woman stood too, her face flushed, her eyes wide. She wasn't sure how to react. She hadn't planned any of this. She had only meant to play a few simple notes, maybe something to make them laugh. But once her fingers touched the keys, everything she had buried inside, the dreams she'd lost, the love for music she thought had faded, came rushing back. The pianist walked toward her and extended his hand. "That was incredible," he said softly, almost in disbelief. She hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, still unsure what to say. "Where did you learn to play like that?" someone in the audience called out. She looked around the room, her voice quiet but steady. "A long time ago," she said. "Before life got busy." The pianist smiled gently. "Well," he said, "you haven't lost your touch." People began to gather around, eager to talk to her, to know more. For the first time that evening, she wasn't invisible. She was the center of attention, not because of her uniform or her job, but because of the way she had made them feel. The pianist looked at her again, still amazed. "Would you like to play another one?" he asked, this time not joking. She smiled shyly, shaking her head. "Maybe another time," she said softly. As the crowd slowly returned to their seats, the pianist turned back to the piano. He played a short piece, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept glancing at her as she returned to her duties, wondering about her story. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, the pianist found her near the kitchen doors. "You should never stop playing," he said quietly. "Music like that doesn't fade. It just waits." She smiled at him, a little embarrassed. "Thank you," she said. "But that part of my life feels like it was so long ago." "Then maybe," he said with a warm smile, "it's time to bring it back." As she walked home that night under the streetlights, the sound of the piano still echoed in her mind. Her fingers moved slightly in the air, as if still playing invisible keys. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A small spark of hope. She didn't know it yet. But that simple dare, that one unexpected moment in front of strangers, was about to change her life forever. The next day began quietly, but inside the hotel, everyone was still talking about what had happened the night before. The story of the woman who had stunned the guests with her piano playing had already spread from one corner of the building to another. The chefs in the kitchen whispered about it while preparing breakfast. The cleaning staff mentioned it as they changed linens and polished mirrors. Even the manager, who was usually strict and serious, couldn't help but smile when someone brought it up. For the woman, however, the morning felt strange. Everything looked the same uniform, the same halls, the same familia. her sounds of guests talking and footsteps echoing on the marble floor. But something inside her had changed. When she walked past the piano that stood in the lounge, her steps slowed without her realizing. The instrument that had once felt distant now called to her softly, as if reminding her of what she had felt when she played. She touched the polished edge of it for a brief second before moving on with her work. She thought maybe people had forgotten about it already, that it was just a small moment of surprise and nothing more. But as she carried trays from one table to another, several guests stopped her with smiles and curious looks. "You were amazing last night," one of them said. "I still can't believe it. You play like a professional." She smiled politely, trying not to blush. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just got lucky, I guess." "Lucky?" The guest laughed. "No, that was pure talent." She thanked them again and quickly moved to another table, feeling both proud and shy. She wasn't used to attention. Her world had always been quiet and ordinary, working long hours, helping guests, saving a little money for her family, and keeping her dreams tucked away like old photographs in a drawer. But now, something was stirring inside her that she couldn't quite explain. Later that afternoon, when the crowd had thinned out, she stood near the bar wiping glasses while the pianist returned to the lounge. He had another short performance that evening, but he came earlier than usual. He spotted her almost immediately and gave her a friendly smile. "Ah, my surprise pianist," he said, walking toward her. "You made quite an impression last night." She felt her face grow warm. "I didn't mean to," she said. "You were joking, and I just thought, well, I don't know what came over me." He chuckled softly. "Whatever it was, don't lose it. What you did was special. I've seen thousands of musicians, students, professionals, even child prodigies. But there was something in your playing that felt honest. You don't get that often." She looked down, not sure how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. "I haven't played in years," she admitted. "Not since I was young." "Then that makes it even more impressive," he said. "You played like someone who never stopped." He leaned against the piano and added, "You should play again tonight. Just one song. People will love it." Her eyes widened. "Oh no," she said quickly. "I can't do that. Last night was different. It just happened. I'm not supposed to be part of the show." He smiled, not giving up easily. "Sometimes the best performances come from moments that aren't planned. Think about it." Before she could answer, someone called for her from the other side of the room. She excused herself, but as she walked away, his words lingered in her mind. All day, she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Her work felt slower, her thoughts scattered. When she went on her break, she sat outside on the small bench behind the hotel, where she usually ate her lunch alone. The sound of city traffic mixed with the faint music drifting from inside. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the feeling of her fingers moving across the keys. It had been so natural, so freeing. For a few minutes last night, she hadn't been a hotel worker or someone struggling to make ends meet. She had just been herself. When her shift ended that night, the pianist was still there practicing alone. The guests hadn't arrived yet. She walked quietly through the lounge with her cleaning supplies, intending to avoid his attention, but he looked up and smiled. "Still thinking about it?" he asked playfully. She laughed softly. "Maybe a little." He moved aside on the piano bench. "Then why don't you?" She hesitated. "The manager will scold me." "I'll tell him I asked," he said with an easy grin. "Come on, just 5 minutes." Something inside her gave in. She put her cleaning cloth down and sat beside him. He began playing a few light notes, and soon she joined in. The two of them played softly, not a real song, but something simple and beautiful. It was like a conversation without words, his hands guiding, hers following. The sound blended perfectly, and for a moment she forgot about everything else. When they stopped, the pianist looked at her thoughtfully. "You have something special," he said. "Don't hide it. Music like that belongs to the world, not just inside your memory." She didn't know what to say. Those words felt heavy but kind. "I used to dream about being a pianist," she said quietly. "But then life happened. My father got sick and I had to work. I thought if I gave it up for a few months, I could always come back. But months turned into years." The pianist nodded, his expression gentle. "Life has a way of stealing dreams from us. But sometimes all it takes is one small moment to bring them back." That night he asked her again to play something in front of the guests. She refused at first, but he promised it would be simple. "Just a short piece," he said. "I'll introduce you as my friend. No one needs to know anything else." She thought about it for a long time. Her hands felt nervous just imagining it, but deep down, she wanted to feel that rush again, the warmth of the music, the way it filled her chest and made her forget everything else. So, when the evening performance began and the pianist started his set, she stayed close to the lounge, pretending to clean the tables but listening closely. The guests applauded after each song. Then, just before the final piece, he looked toward her and said with a smile, "Before I play my last song, I'd like to invite someone special to join me tonight. Some of you might remember her from last night, the woman who surprised us all." The crowd turned, clapping lightly as she froze in her spot. Her heart pounded. He gestured for her to come forward. For a moment, she thought about refusing, but something inside her pushed her to take that first step. She walked toward the piano again, her hands trembling slightly. The pianist stood and motioned for her to sit. "Let's show them something beautiful," he whispered. She nodded, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes were soft, uncertain, but then the melody grew clearer. The pianist joined in beside her, blending his part seamlessly with hers. Together, they created a sound that was pure magic, rich, emotional, and alive. Guests leaned forward, captivated once again. The woman who had been serving them their meals hours ago was now sharing something deeply human, something that words couldn't describe. She played not for fame or applause, but because it made her feel alive. When the final note ended, there was silence again, the kind of silence that feels sacred. Then the applause came, loud and heartfelt. Some guests even stood up, cheering. The pianist smiled proudly and whispered, "See, I told you." After the performance, many people came to talk to her, to thank her for the music. One guest, an elderly woman, held her hand and said, "You reminded me of my daughter. She used to play like that before she passed away." "Thank you." The woman's eyes filled with emotion. That simple sentence meant more than any applause. She realized that her music had touched someone deeply, and that was all she had ever wanted, to make someone feel something real. Later, when the crowd was gone and the lights were dim, she sat alone at the piano for a while. Her hands rested on the keys and she smiled quietly to herself. She didn't know what the future would bring, but something had shifted. The music she thought she had lost forever had found its way back to her. As she left the lounge, she turned back for one last look at the piano. It no longer looked like a grand instrument meant for someone else. It felt like hers again, a part of her she was ready to reclaim. Outside, the night was calm. The city lights glowed softly and the cool breeze brushed against her face. She walked slowly, her mind full of new thoughts and possibilities. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe dreams could wait for us even when we stopped chasing them. She didn't know yet that her performance that night would be remembered far beyond that room. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and before long, it would spread to places she could never have imagined. But for now, she was just happy, quietly, deeply happy, knowing that a single act of courage had awakened something she thought was gone forever. The following morning felt completely different from any other day in her life. She woke up early before the sun had fully risen and sat by the small window of her room. The soft orange light touched her face, and for a moment she felt peaceful. The sound of last night's applause still echoed in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the faces of the guests, their surprised expressions turning into smiles as she played. It almost felt unreal, like a dream that had somehow become real. When she got ready for work, she caught herself humming a tune, the same melody she had played the night before. She hadn't done that in years. Music had always been something she kept hidden, locked away in a part of her heart she rarely visited. But now that door had opened and she couldn't close it again. As she entered the hotel that morning, several co-workers stopped her in the hallway. One of the receptionists grinned. "You're famous now," he joked. "Everyone's been talking about your piano performance." She laughed softly, trying to brush it off. "Please don't start," she said, but inside she felt a warm glow. It was strange to be noticed, strange but nice. When she walked through the lobby, the piano stood silently in its usual place. It looked different now, not just like a piece of furniture, but like something alive, something that had brought her back to life. She reached out and touched the smooth surface of the instrument, feeling a rush of emotion she couldn't quite explain. Later that afternoon, as she worked near the lounge, she saw the famous pianist talking to the hotel manager. They both looked up when she passed by. The pianist gave her a friendly wave, motioning for her to come over. "There you are," he said warmly. "I was just telling your manager that you stole my show again last night." She smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to, I just played." "That's what makes it special," he said. "You didn't play to impress anyone. You played because it's who you are." The manager nodded. "You've brought a lot of attention to the hotel, you know. Guests have been asking about you all morning." She was surprised. "About me?" "Yes," the manager said, clearly amused. "One of them even said your playing made them cry. They want to know more about you and where you learned, what inspired you." She didn't know what to say. It all felt overwhelming. She had always preferred quiet moments, never the spotlight. But now, people were looking at her as if she were someone important. Before she could respond, a young hotel guest walked up to her with a phone in hand. "Excuse me," the guest said. "Are you the woman who played last night?" She hesitated before nodding. "I recorded a bit of it," the guest said, showing her the screen. The video showed her sitting at the piano, playing beside the pianist. The sound was a little fuzzy, but even through the small phone speaker, the music felt alive. "I posted it online last night," the guest continued, smiling. "It's already getting a lot of views. People love it." Her heart skipped a beat. "Views?" she asked. "Yes," the guest said excitedly. "Thousands, maybe more by now. Everyone's saying how emotional your playing was. You should look at the comments, they're all beautiful." She didn't know what to think. The idea that strangers from all over were watching her, hearing her play, felt unreal. A part of her wanted to hide, but another part of her felt strangely happy. The pianist looked at her and said gently, "See, the world needed to hear you." Later that evening, when her shift ended, she sat in the staff room with her phone in her hand, unsure if she should look up the video. Curiosity won. She opened her browser and typed a few words. It didn't take long to find it. There it was, with thousands of views already. The title read, "Hotel Waitress Stuns Famous Pianist with Beautiful Performance." She clicked on it, and within seconds, her own image appeared on the screen. She watched herself nervously sit down at the piano, then start to play. The moment the music began, she could hear the same emotion she had felt that night. The comments below were filled with kindness. "Her playing made me cry. She plays with so much feeling. This is what real music sounds like. Someone give her a record deal." Her eyes filled with tears as she scrolled. It wasn't the praise that moved her. It was the fact that her music had touched people she didn't even know. For years, she had believed her dream didn't matter anymore, that the world had no place for her passion. But here it was. Proof that what she thought was gone had never truly left. When she came to work the next day, things felt even more different. A few journalists had shown up in the lobby, asking the manager for permission to speak with her. A local news channel wanted to do a small story about her. The manager asked if she was comfortable with that, but she hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I'm not used to this kind of attention." The pianist stepped in with his calm, reassuring voice. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "But remember, this is your moment. You deserve it," she nodded slowly. "I just don't want people to think I'm trying to be famous," he smiled. "You didn't ask for fame. You played from your heart. That's what people see, and that's what they love." That afternoon, while she served tea to a table of guests, one of them recognized her immediately.
"You're the woman from the video,"
the guest exclaimed.
"You made my mother cry last night, in a good way."
She said your music reminded her of her youth. The woman laughed softly. "I'm glad she liked it," she said, her cheeks turning red. By the end of the week, the video had millions of views. News outlets were talking about the mysterious hotel worker with the golden touch. People from around the world were sharing her story on how a simple woman had outplayed a world-class pianist in a moment that no one could have planned. One evening, as she was cleaning up after a long shift, the pianist approached her with a thoughtful look. "I have an idea," he said. "There's a charity concert next month in the city. It's for children who can't afford music lessons. I was supposed to perform alone, but I'd like you to join me." She stared at him in shock. "Join you, me?" On stage, he nodded. "Yes, you belong there." Her heart raced. The thought of playing in front of hundreds of people terrified her. "I don't think I can," she said quietly. "I'll freeze. I'll make mistakes." "You won't," he said softly. "Do you remember how you played that first night? That wasn't training or preparation. That was heart. That's what people need to hear. She didn't answer right away. She spent the rest of the evening thinking about it, torn between fear and excitement. When she got home, she sat down on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They were calloused from work, rough from carrying trays and washing dishes. Yet those same hands had just changed her life. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is my second chance." Over the next few days, she practiced whenever she could. The pianist allowed her to use the hotel piano after hours, and sometimes he stayed to guide her. They played duets, experimented with different melodies, and talked about music for hours. For the first time in years, she felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with survival. It wasn't about earning a living anymore. It was about living with purpose. One night, as they practiced a soft, emotional piece for the upcoming concert, he paused and looked at her. "You know," he said, "when I first dared you to play, I thought it would just be a funny moment. I never imagined you'd teach me something instead." She smiled curiously. "Teach you what?" "That music isn't about perfection," he said. "It's about honesty." "You reminded me of that," her eyes softened. "And you reminded me that it's never too late to dream." The days passed quickly. The concert date was approaching, and word about her appearance had already spread online. People were eager to see her perform again, the unknown woman whose song had silenced a crowd. She tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on each note, each feeling that flowed through her fingers. The night before the concert, she barely slept. She kept thinking about the life she had lived before this, the struggles, the responsibilities, the quiet moments of doubt. She wondered what her younger self would have thought if she could see her now. In the early morning light, she looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't see just a hotel worker anymore. She saw a woman who had fought her way through years of silence and found her voice again. When she walked into the hotel that day, the pianist greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I think I am." He handed her a small folded piece of paper. "Here," he said. "Something for courage." She unfolded it. Inside was a handwritten note. "The world listens when you play. Don't ever stop." For a long moment, she held the paper close to her heart. Then she smiled, knowing that whatever happened next, she had already won something far greater than fame. She had found herself again, and that was the most beautiful music of all. The air inside the Grand Hotel was still buzzing from what had just happened. The guests couldn't stop talking about the unexpected moment they had witnessed, a quiet woman from the hotel staff sitting down at the piano and playing, like she had been born with music flowing through her veins. The famous pianist, who had only meant to joke with her, now stood there completely silent, his mind racing to process what he had just seen. Her music had moved everyone, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it carried a deep, raw emotion that couldn't be faked. As the applause slowly faded, the woman sat frozen on the piano bench. She didn't expect people to cheer for her. Her hand still trembled slightly, and she felt her heartbeat pounding in her chest. For a moment, she thought maybe she had dreamed the whole thing. The pianist stepped closer, his expression softer now, no longer teasing. He asked her gently where she had learned to play like that. The woman smiled nervously and looked down, explaining that she used to play when she was younger but hadn't touched a piano properly in years. Life, she said, had taken her in another direction. The pianist nodded quietly. He didn't say anything for a moment, but everyone could tell he was thinking deeply. Then he looked at her and said with genuine admiration, "You played beautifully. Would you play one more piece with me?" The crowd gasped, surprised by his invitation. The woman's eyes widened. She shook her head at first, whispering that she wasn't ready for something like that. But the pianist smiled kindly and assured her that she had nothing to fear. "Music doesn't care who you are," he said softly. "It only listens to the heart that plays it." His words touched her. After a few seconds, she nodded slowly. The pianist pulled out a chair beside her, sat down, and adjusted the sheet music on the stand. The room grew quiet again, so quiet that even the soft rustle of the pianist's coat seemed loud. He placed his hands gently on the keys and began a slow, graceful melody. After a few measures, the woman joined in. At first, she played carefully, almost shyly, letting him lead. But soon she found her rhythm. Her fingers began to move with confidence, weaving harmonies around his notes. Together, they created something magical, a blend of technical perfection and deep emotion. The audience could feel every rise and fall, every heartbeat inside the melody. It was like two worlds had met at that piano, one of fame and mastery, the other of quiet passion and forgotten dreams. The music built gradually, filling the room with a wave of sound that made several guests close their eyes just to feel it better. The pianist stole a glance at her and noticed something remarkable. She wasn't just following him anymore. She was leading certain parts, adding her own emotions and phrasing. It was as though she knew the song better than he did. When they finally ended on a gentle fading note, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Then slowly the audience began to clap, softly at first, then louder, rising to a standing ovation. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The pianist looked at her and smiled, whispering, "You've just given everyone a gift they won't forget." The woman covered her face, embarrassed by the attention. She wasn't used to applause or admiration. Her co-workers were cheering for her from the side of the room, their smiles wide with pride. One of the guests came forward and asked if she was a professional musician. She shook her head, explaining that she had once studied music but had to stop because her family needed her to work. Since then, she had taken any job she could to make ends meet, and playing the piano had become a memory she rarely revisited. The pianist listened quietly. He could see that she spoke with sincerity, not seeking sympathy but simply telling the truth. There was something about her honesty that touched him deeply. He told her that talent like hers should never be hidden away. Then he turned to the audience and said, "Tonight I wasn't the star." She was. The guests laughed warmly, but they knew he meant it. His words carried weight. They came from someone who had spent a lifetime mastering music and could recognize true passion when he saw it. The woman blushed, looking down, unsure how to react to such praise. The pianist asked if she had any plans to return to music. She hesitated before saying that she didn't think it was possible anymore. Life had too many responsibilities and dreams didn't pay the bills. The pianist smiled again, his eyes kind but firm. "Maybe not before," he said, "but perhaps it's time to let your music be heard again." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests approached her asking questions, offering compliments, and telling her how moved they had been. The pianist stayed by her side, introducing her to everyone and insisting she deserved the spotlight. The hotel manager, who had been standing at the back during the performance, walked up and told her how proud he was. He even joked that they might need to find a piano for her in the staff room. When the event finally ended, and the guests began to leave, the pianist turned to her one last time. "You've reminded me of something important tonight," he said quietly. "Music isn't about perfection, it's about truth, and yours spoke louder than any performance I've given." She didn't know what to say. Her heart was full, but her mind was spinning. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life for an evening. She thanked him, saying that she had never imagined anyone would take her seriously again. He smiled and told her to come to his concert in the city next week, as his guest. The next morning, the entire hotel buzzed with excitement. Staff members couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Guests who had stayed overnight were sharing the story over breakfast. One of them had recorded the entire moment on their phone, and by lunchtime, the video had begun spreading online. People were amazed by the story of a simple woman who stunned a world-class pianist. Meanwhile, she went back to work as usual. She polished glasses, arranged tables, and served guests, trying to keep her mind off the sudden attention. But deep down, something had changed inside her. For years, she had accepted that her dream of being a musician was over. Now, for the first time, it felt like maybe it wasn't. That evening, as she walked home, she thought about the music she had played, the feeling of her fingers moving across the keys, the way the melody had flowed through her. She remembered the sound of the applause and how, for a brief moment, she had felt truly alive again. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she missed that part of herself. At home, she sat by the small wooden table where her younger brother was doing his homework. He looked up and asked how her evening had gone, and she smiled softly. She didn't tell him everything, but she said, "Something unexpected happened." He laughed and asked if it was good or bad. She paused for a second, then replied, "It might have been the best thing that's happened in a long time." That night she couldn't sleep. The music kept replaying in her mind, not just the notes but the emotions behind them. She could still see the pianist's expression when he realized she could truly play. She could still hear the sound of the audience clapping, their voices filled with surprise and admiration. She got out of bed quietly and went to the small upright piano she had at home, an old one she'd bought years ago from a thrift shop, but rarely touched anymore. The keys were a little stiff and some were slightly out of tune, but it still worked. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play softly so as not to wake anyone. The melody she played was slow and simple, but it was full of feeling. It wasn't for anyone else this time. It was for herself. For the girl who once dreamed of being a pianist, for the woman who had buried that dream, and for the person she was becoming again. As she played, tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. The music was like breathing again after years of silence. It reminded her that no matter how much time had passed, passion never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to return. When she finally stopped, she wiped her eyes, smiling softly to herself. For the first time in years, she felt hope, a quiet, steady kind of hope that filled her with peace. In another part of the city, the famous pianist sat in his hotel suite, replaying the video someone had shown him earlier that day. The same performance captured from a guest's phone. He watched the woman's hands moving across the keys and felt the same awe all over again. He knew that what had happened wasn't just a coincidence. It was fate. He decided then that he wouldn't let her story end there. He picked up his phone and sent a message to his manager, asking him to arrange something special for the upcoming concert. He didn't explain much, only that he wanted to invite a remarkable guest to perform with him on stage. The next morning, as the woman arrived at the hotel for her shift, she was greeted with unexpected news. A letter was waiting for her at the front desk, sealed in a cream-colored envelope with the pianist's initials printed on it. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a short handwritten note that said, "Your music deserves to be heard again. Join me this weekend." Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words over and over. She looked around the lobby, half expecting someone to tell her it was a prank. But it was real. The letter even included a ticket to the concert and a backstage pass. For a long time, she just stood there, speechless. Then slowly, a small smile formed on her face. The kind that comes from realizing that life sometimes gives you second chances when you least expect them. And she was ready to take hers. When she held the letter in her hands, she couldn't believe it was real. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers as she reread the words again and again. The famous pianist, the same man who had jokingly dared her to play in front of the crowd, was now inviting her to perform with him on a real stage, in front of thousands of people. For a long time, she just stood there in the quiet hotel lobby, her mind unable to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Her co-worker walked past and noticed her frozen there, the letter still open. "What's that?" he asked curiously. She didn't answer right away. Then she handed it to him silently, her eyes still wide. He read it and gasped. "You're going to play with him? The pianist everyone was talking about?" She nodded slowly, still in disbelief. "I think so," she whispered. "I don't know why he'd want me to." He grinned. "Because you're good, that's why. You made everyone in that room forget to breathe." She smiled faintly but felt a nervous knot form in her stomach. It was one thing to play in front of a few hotel guests by surprise, but performing on a real stage beside a world-famous musician felt terrifying. What if she made a mistake? What if she froze? What if people thought she didn't belong there? Those questions filled her mind the rest of the day. That night, when she got home, she sat down at her small piano again. The same one with the slightly uneven keys. She ran her fingers across them gently as if testing their warmth. The idea of performing again frightened her, but deep inside she also felt a strange spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. It was the same feeling she used to have when she was a student, dreaming of playing for audiences who could feel her heart through the music. The next few days moved quickly. Between her work shifts, she practiced late into the night, repeating difficult sections until her fingers hurt. She wanted to be ready. She didn't have fancy equipment or a teacher to guide her anymore, but she had determination. And she had a story, one that came out through every note she played. Meanwhile, word about the hotel performance had already spread far beyond what she could imagine. The video taken by one of the guests was now everywhere online. People were calling her the mystery pianist and talking about how her playing had silenced the entire room. Journalists wanted to know who she was, where she came from, how a woman who worked in a hotel could play like that. The hotel manager called her into his office one morning. "You've become quite famous," he said kindly, handing her his tablet so she could see all the articles and clips being shared online. She blinked at the screen, overwhelmed. There she was, sitting at the grand piano in her uniform, looking nervous yet calm, completely unaware that the moment would change her life. The manager smiled. "You've made us proud. Whatever happens next, just know that you deserve this." She thanked him softly, though she still wasn't sure she really did deserve it. She didn't see herself as special, just someone who loved music and had gotten lucky. But deep down she also felt a quiet pride growing. Maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was time that her hidden passion found its way back to the world. The day of the concert finally arrived. The theater was massive, far grander than the hotel lounge where it all began. Rows upon rows of red velvet seats stretched out under dazzling lights. When she stepped inside during rehearsal, she felt small, almost invisible, like a tiny figure in a sea of sound and space. The pianist stood on stage already smiling when he saw her. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. "I was hoping you wouldn't change your mind." She laughed nervously. "I almost did," she admitted. He chuckled. "Fear is natural. I still get it before every concert. But once the music starts, it disappears." He walked her through the evening plan. They would each play a solo piece, then perform a duet at the end, a piece they had practiced briefly together during the week. She listened carefully, nodding, but her hands still felt cold. They spent the next few hours rehearsing. The pianist was patient, offering gentle advice and adjusting his playing to match hers. He didn't treat her like a beginner or an assistant. He treated her like a fellow musician. That simple gesture gave her confidence. When their duet finally came together, the sound was beautiful, rich, emotional, and alive. Later, as the audience began to arrive, she waited backstage, her heart racing. She could hear the murmur of the crowd through the curtains. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. She closed her eyes and tried to calm herself, whispering, "You've done this before. You can do it again." The pianist went on first, playing one of his signature pieces that always left the audience breathless. The applause that followed was thunderous. Then he turned toward the microphone and said something that made the entire hall quiet. "Tonight," he said, "I want to share this stage with someone very special. She reminded me recently why music matters, not for fame or glory, but for its power to connect hearts. Please welcome my guest." Backstage, she froze for a moment. Then one of the crew members nudged her gently. "That's your cue." She walked onto the stage, her legs trembling but her chin lifted. The audience looked curious, whispering among themselves as they recognized her face from the viral video. She sat down at the grand piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The pianist nodded at her with a reassuring smile. The first few notes came softly. The melody floated across the hall, delicate but full of feeling. The crowd fell silent. Her hands began to move faster, more confidently as she lost herself in the music. Every note told a piece of her story, the struggle, the loss, the hope. She played not to impress anyone, but because this was her truth. The pianist joined in halfway, his part blending seamlessly with hers. Together, they created something even more powerful than before. The audience could feel it. This wasn't just a performance. It was a conversation between two souls who understood each other through music. By the time the final note faded, there wasn't a single sound in the hall. For a few seconds, it was as if time had stopped. Then the applause began, slow, then louder, until the whole room stood on its feet. People were cheering, clapping, shouting her name. Tears filled her eyes. She couldn't believe what was happening. The pianist stood and bowed, then turned to her and gestured for her to take the spotlight. "This moment belongs to you," he whispered. She stood, trembling, overwhelmed by emotion. She looked out at the audience, at the hundreds of faces smiling back at her. For the first time in many years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. After the concert, she was surrounded by people backstage, musicians, reporters, and fans. They all wanted to talk to her, to know her story. The pianist stayed close by, making sure she wasn't too overwhelmed. One journalist asked what it felt like to play again after so many years. She thought for a moment before answering. "It felt like remembering who I am," she said softly. "I thought I had lost this part of myself, but it was still there waiting." The journalist smiled, clearly moved by her words. As the night went on, she and the pianist sat together quietly after everyone else had left. The theater, the night after the concert, felt like a dream she couldn't wake up from. Her mind kept replaying the sound of the applause, the way the audience had stood up for her, and the warmth in the pianist's smile when they finished their duet. For hours after returning home, she just sat by her small piano, touching the keys softly, still unsure if everything that had happened was real. The air around her felt different, lighter, alive, filled with a quiet kind of magic that words couldn't describe. Her phone, which rarely buzzed except for work calls, now wouldn't stop lighting up. Messages poured in from people she didn't even know, old friends, reporters, and music lovers from all over. Some said her story had moved them to tears. Others said her courage inspired them to chase their own dreams again. She scrolled through them in disbelief, her eyes welling up. She had never imagined that a single night could change her entire life. The following morning, she arrived at the hotel as usual. But the moment she stepped through the door, everyone stopped what they were doing. The staff clapped and cheered. Someone had printed a picture from the concert, her sitting at the grand piano, and pinned it to the notice board with a note that said, "Our shining star." She blushed deeply, trying to hide her face as everyone gathered around to congratulate her. The hotel manager came forward with a proud smile. "You've made us famous," he said warmly. "Guests are calling, asking if the pianist from the viral concert still works here." She laughed nervously. "I'm still the same person," she said, though inside she knew she was no longer quite the same. Something in her heart had shifted. She wasn't just a quiet hotel worker anymore. She had found her voice again through music. Later that afternoon, she received another message from the pianist. It was short but heartfelt. "The world needs to hear you again," it said. "Would you join me on my upcoming tour?" Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. A tour meant traveling, performing in front of thousands, living a life she had only ever dreamed of. But it also meant stepping into a completely new world, one that could be overwhelming. She sat there quietly, staring at the message, unsure what to do. That evening, she visited the small park near her home. She sat on a bench watching families, children, and street performers under the fading orange light. The sound of laughter, the rustle of leaves, the soft rhythm of life around her. Everything seemed to blend into a quiet melody. She closed her eyes and thought about how far she had come. From cleaning tables to standing on a grand stage, it felt unbelievable. But as she thought deeper, she realized this wasn't just luck. It was years of love for music that had never really left her. When she returned home, she took out a notebook from the drawer, the same one she used years ago when she was learning piano. Inside were old notes, scribbled dreams, and pieces she had written when she was younger. She flipped through the worn-out pages and tears filled her eyes. It was as if her younger self was smiling at her from the past, whispering, "You made it back." She picked up her pen and wrote something new that night. A simple melody, soft and full of hope. It was about rediscovery, about remembering who you are when the world forgets you. She didn't have a name for it yet, but she knew she wanted to play it someday. Not for fame, but for herself and everyone who had once given up on their dreams. Over the next few weeks, her life changed rapidly. Interviews, invitations, and messages kept pouring in. News channels wanted to feature her story. Music teachers sent letters saying she had inspired their students. Some people even started calling her the miracle pianist. It all felt strange, but she remained humble, always reminding herself of where she came from. She still worked part-time at the hotel, still said hello to everyone, still smiled shyly when guests recognized her. When the pianist's manager called to finalize the tour arrangements, she hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure I'm ready for this?" she asked softly. The manager's voice was kind. "He wouldn't have asked you if you weren't," he said, so she agreed. The first stop on the tour was in another city, in a grand concert hall that could hold thousands. When she arrived for rehearsal, she was stunned by how enormous it was. The lights, the sound, the rows of seats stretching endlessly. It was all overwhelming. But the pianist greeted her warmly, his presence calming her nerves. "Don't think about the crowd," he said gently. "Think about the music." That night, as the curtains opened, she felt the same nerves she had felt at the hotel months ago. The audience was silent, waiting. The pianist nodded at her, and together they began to play. The sound was clear, deep, and beautiful. Every note carried emotion, telling a story of second chances and forgotten dreams reignited. The crowd listened quietly, completely absorbed. When the final note faded, the applause came again, powerful, long, and full of love. People were standing, clapping, cheering her name. She looked around in awe, realizing that this was her new life. Not one built by fame, but by courage. After the concert, as they stood backstage, the pianist turned to her and said softly, "You reminded me why I love music. You've given everyone hope tonight." She smiled, feeling tears in her eyes. "You gave me a chance," she said. He shook his head. "You gave yourself one." As the weeks went by, they traveled to different cities, each with its own stage, its own audience, its own magic. In every performance, she poured her heart into the keys, never trying to be perfect, only to be real. People who watched her play said they could feel something different, something human, something deeply emotional. Her story began inspiring others beyond the world of music. People who had left their dreams behind started picking them up again. Some sent her letters saying her courage helped them believe in themselves. Every time she read one, she felt grateful. One evening, after another successful concert, she sat alone at the edge of the stage while the crew packed up. The empty seats stretched before her, bathed in soft golden light. She ran her fingers across the keys and smiled. She remembered her first performance at the hotel, how scared she had been, how unexpected it all was. Now sitting here, she felt peace. The pianist walked up quietly and sat beside her. "You know," he said softly, "that night at the hotel when I asked you to play, I thought it was just a joke. But now I realize it wasn't me choosing you. It was music choosing you again." She looked at him and smiled warmly. "Maybe it was choosing both of us," she said. He laughed gently. Maybe it was. They sat there for a while, just listening to the silence of the empty hall, which somehow felt as musical as any song they had played. Months passed, and the tour came to an end, but her journey didn't stop. She received offers to teach, to record, to perform around the world, but she didn't rush. She wanted to do things her way, and slow, honest, meaningful. She began working on her own compositions, songs inspired by her journey, by the people she had met, by the beauty of starting over. Her first public composition debut came a year later. The same hotel where it all began hosted a special evening in her honor. The lounge looked almost the same, but now there was a grand piano at the center, and the audience was filled with familiar faces, hotel staff, guests, friends, and even the pianist who had started it all. When she sat down to play, her hands didn't shake this time. She smiled, took a deep breath, and began. The melody she played was the one she had written months ago, soft, heartfelt, and full of hope. Every note told a story of how a quiet woman found her courage, how she rediscovered her love, and how life can surprise you in the most unexpected ways. When she finished, the room was filled with applause, but more than that, it was filled with emotion. People smiled, some cried, some simply closed their eyes, letting the music speak. Afterward, the pianist hugged her and whispered, "You did it." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "No," she said softly. "We did it, and so did everyone who ever believed again because of that night." As the evening went on, she stood by the piano, watching the people around her, laughing, talking, feeling connected. She realized that this was what music was meant to do, not just entertain, but bring hearts together. That night, as she walked home under the quiet sky, she looked up at the stars and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her life had come full circle, from the shy hotel worker who had once been dared to play a few notes, to the woman whose music had touched the world. And though fame and recognition had come her way, she knew that wasn't what truly mattered. What mattered was that she had found herself again, the version of her that believed in dreams, in courage, and in the quiet, powerful voice of music that lives inside every human heart. As she reached her home, she sat by her piano once more. The keys glowed softly under the warm lamplight. She placed her fingers on them, smiling, and began to play the same song she had played that first night, the song that had silenced the whole room and changed her life forever. But this time, it wasn't for anyone else. It was just for her, a simple, honest song played by someone who had finally found her way back home.